Welcome to the Chapter 32 overview, and in this overview I am going to try to give you a broad sense of how different societies reacted across the globe to Industrial Revolution. So that's what the title, Societies at a Crosswords, or Crossroads, is kind of referring to. And I picked this picture here because this picture represents the problem with these different societies we're going to be learning about, the Ottomans, the Russians, the Chinese, and Japan. This is Tsietsi's, the Tsietsi's marble boat. Tsietsi was an empress of China, and there was money set aside in China to modernize and expand the Chinese navy. And instead of using this money that had been set aside by the advisors for to strengthen China, Empress Xizi decided that instead she would use that money to construct a marble boat, which, as you might infer, did not actually ever move in her summer palace so that she could have parties on it. This boat replaced a different marble boat that was built in 1755 and destroyed in the Anglo by the Anglos and the French in the First Opium War of 1860. So hooray for the marble boat, which is now in one of the most visited parks in China. In one book I've read describes the reaction to industrialization by these societies as the proverbial ostrich putting its head in the sand, meaning that although these societies could have responded to industrialization, they instead kind of ignored the changes that were going on around them or the problems that they saw, which of course didn't go very well for them. So, a little bit of perspective. In the 19th century, these different societies, Tokugawa Japan, Qing China, the Ottoman Empire, and Russia, all faced profound changes that fundamentally transformed their powerful states. In some cases, the threats, both internal, like population growth or rebellions, and external, such as the Europeans, caused the societies to undergo transformation that left the states better equipped in the case of of Japan and Russia to face the 20th century. In other cases, however, the states were essentially shattered and quickly fell prey to modern and industrialized rivals. The slow pace of technological advancement in Russia, Japan, and China and the Ottoman Empire left them in a very difficult position behind Western Europe and the United States. The four societies also faced other common problems, such as population pressures. Their populations were higher than the amount of food that they could produce, falling agricultural productivity because of rebellions, which came first, the chicken or the egg, the famine or the rebellion. Well, that depends. Also, yes, like I said, famine, declining tax revenue, declining revenue from trade, and also corrupt bureaucracies. In the end, Japan and to a lesser extent Russia more effectively reformed than China and the Ottomans. So some of the commonalities that these societies faced all faced internal pressures and turmoil, all faced external pressures. They all had to respond to the political and economic revolutions of the West. They all faced declining agricultural productivity because of the different internal pressures. And they all had conservative and liberal conflict within their governments. They all had some people advocating for change and some people pushing against change. I tried to pick pictures in this PowerPoint that would embody the different challenges that these places were facing. And what I'm going to do with these pictures is try to explain to you the different challenges, again, that these groups are facing. And also, I'm just going to list underneath the pictures the different kind of terms that you need to know. Because you are doing projects, presentations in class, this is going to be more of a direction for those presentations. So in China, they were really facing a new pressure from the West. This is an opium factory. This opium factory is actually in India. And India was, of course, controlled by the British, right? And it, opium is an extremely addictive substance. We even see this today causing problems in our society, which we will talk about in class. But the majority of the world's opium at this time was produced in India, which was, of course, a British colony. The British wanted to have a favorable trade balance with the Chinese, but they couldn't find anything that the Chinese wanted from Great Britain to trade with them. So they started trading opium. And of course, like I said, opium is extremely addictive and extremely hazardous to a society. The British originally or eventually outlawed the sale of opium in their own country, but continued to sell it to the Chinese. So, when the Chinese decided that they were going to crack down on the amount of opium that was entering their country, there was a war, a series of war called the Opium Wars. The causes and consequences of the Opium Wars were profound for the 19th century China. Beyond a mere dispute with the British over opium, the conflict centered around the questions of sovereignty and modernity. The Chinese lost both of these opium wars, and they signed this thing called the Treaty of Nanking, named after the capital. This gave the British control of Hong Kong, which remained under British control well into the 20th century. And it's also changed trading conditions and made trading concessions to the British. More importantly, this humiliating defeat revealed the weakness of China. Even as the Western Europeans applied external pressures, China was collapsing also internally. And we'll look at that in the next page. There are actually two opium wars, and the opium wars are down here, and then the rebellions we'll talk about here. And I guess we'll spend a little bit of time on the rebellions on this page as well. So this map shows more of the unequal treaties that were signed in China with China. And I know it's blurry, but you can make out the different holdings by foreign nations within China. The British are this green part here. So one word that you should remember is unequal treaties. The Treaty of Nanjing is one example of these. So internally, some of the things that China was facing were huge rebellions. And these are pictured on this map over here. The different colored areas are areas that succumbed to rebellion or that were in rebellion at this time. Oops. So, some of the different rebellions. Hong Xiuquan's devastating Taiping Rebellion fed off of the chaos and popular discontent of the government's incompetence. By 1864, the Taiping Rebellion, which hopefully your classmates will talk about the leader of this, he's a little bit nuts. He thinks he's the brother of Jesus. Um, this Taiping Rebellion, he's also influenced a little bit by communist thought, had left 30 million Chinese dead. Attempts at reform, like the self-strengthening movement, were an attempt after these rebellions to combine Chinese culture with European technology. Now, of course, the Empress Cixi and other imperial figures were extremely against this, extremely hesitant, to the point where they actually defunded some of these movements. The Qing Empire also decreased in size, and this inspired an emperor to embark on the 100 Days of Reform, which was trying to speed up reform in China and modernization. That was in 1898. The Empress Dowager Cixi imprisoned that emperor and totally stopped the reforms. Also, because of all this turbulence, there was this thing called the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxer Rebellion also resulted in a lot of turbulence in China, but it did not come to anything. The Boxers were the Society of Righteous and Harmonious Fists, and these Boxers attempted to take over Nanking. They did not succeed, but they did screw a lot of things up, and they were eventually tried, and then the Boxers were beheaded. That's it for the first part of this PowerPoint. We'll move into the second part where I'll talk about Russia, the Ottomans, and Japan.